Hey, on LokadTV this week we're going to be discussing sales and operations planning, more commonly referred to as S&OP. This is a business process where the executive leadership team come together to decide how to best manage a company's resources. Whilst not being a particularly new concept, it is rarely well understood and can be very difficult for a business to implement. So Johannes, I guess a good place to start is exactly what is S&OP? Could you describe it in a little bit more detail?
Yes, S&OP is the answer to the fact that in a large company that is running with a large supply chain in the middle, you need to have pretty much a complete alignment of everyone, like from marketing, sales, logistics, warehousing, production, purchasing, everything, so that you can deliver the goods that the market seeks. So that means complete internal alignment, but also an alignment with the external forces that are external to the company, which are basically the demand as observed on the market. And it turned out that if you do not have this alignment, then basically you end up with, I would say, a terrible situation where basically the sales team are selling something that you do not produce, or you're producing something that you do not sell. So clearly alignment is extremely desirable, internal alignment. And then obviously you want ultimately to have an alignment that is also aligned with what the market demands. So far so good. I would say it really makes sense, and it's really a challenge. And what probably during the 20th century, what the very large, fast consumer goods company have invented is a way to serve mass market with having all this internal alignment that also happen to be aligned with what the market demand. And in order to do that, they have also, I would say, this industry has collectively invented a series of process which has been kind of crystallized under, I would say, the name S&OP, which represents a certain ideal of, I would say, of best practices in this respect.
Okay, so it's basically a way of getting a lot of internal departments to basically talk to each other and to communicate a little bit better. So where did this concept actually come from? Where did it originate?
So I think it was crystallized by ex-executives. I don't know historically exactly how it emerged, but I would say it was clearly crystallized by, I would say, ex-executives turned consultants who basically started to have like a well-rounded recipe to basically implement S&OP. So we are talking of basically consulting materials on how to replicate this process that had been set up on some large companies into other companies. And it's really, in the end, it was really at its core a better way to manage the supply chain. So it's clearly something that comes from I would say, a strategic management mindset.
Okay, and that's basically kind of similar to what we're doing here at Lokad. We're talking about things as a whole business kind of process. We're talking about improving communications, improving things. So you say so far so good. What's not so good?
So I think it's subtle, because there is a kind of a paradigm shift when you go from, let's say, S&OP to what we do at Lokad, which is quantitative supply chain. It's not that problems cease to be, so alignment is still a challenge, etc. It's just that the core of the challenge, I would say, is shifted. So one of the things is that I would say, the core focus of S&OP is really that supply chain problems can be essentially solved with better management and better practices in the way different divisions in your company talk to each other, and the way the information flows between people. The perspective of quantitative supply chain is very different. The perspective is that information is primarily flowing from one computer to another, from one machine to another. So it doesn't involve anybody. And when you think about it, you see one of the key challenges is that if you have 10 products that you're producing and selling, then yes, you can bring people to a room, and then they will discuss what is the most likely outcome for the demand for those 10 products, and maybe in their mind, all the shareholders will be able to form a reasonably, I would say, accurate idea of what the future hold for each one of those 10 products. Now, let's take like the typical situation for a large company nowadays where it's not 10 products, it's like 100,000 product references. Suddenly, it's completely inhuman. Nobody has, can hold in their own mind what is going to happen for every single one of those references. So you end up with a situation where this process where we're supposed to talk to each other, I mean, you just cannot convey this information. And so, and then you end up with a process that fundamentally, where it's fundamentally very difficult to convey this sort of information. So people tend to focus on, I would say, information that is more aggregated. For example, at the product category level or something. But then you end up with all the sort of problems that we mentioned in the previous episode, with all the problems with fragmentation, vertical fragmentation and horizontal fragmentation. So this creates problem on its own. And I believe that, quantitative supply chain primarily address those problems by taking the whole thing, the whole supply chain challenge, from a completely different perspective.
Well, so I guess kind of the real benefit of an S&OP process is you're getting all of the departments to contribute to that problem, and you're looking at things through the eyes of every single department. Is not the problem with a quantitative supply chain that you're just looking at it with a real supply chain focus and you're kind of having that supply chain bias?
Yes and no. The question is, if you bring people together, what are you going to agree on? You see? And I would say from this S&OP perspective, people want to agree on what is the future state of the market, future state of the demand that is going to be served, and create alignment of everybody on that. The perspective of quantitative supply chain is not that. Alignment on what is the state of the market is kind of a given that is given by the machine. It sounds very maybe surprising, but the idea is that, again, if you have like tens of thousands of different product references, you want to have the forecast that is completely automated. And this forecast is if you produce it in a way that is completely automated, then you can share this forecast with everyone in the company automatically every single day. So you don't need to agree on that. It's kind of a given. And then people say, well, but what if the forecast is not accurate? And that's another class of problem that is also solved by probabilistic forecasts, where instead of having a forecast where you say, this is it, this is the future, you have all the probabilities for all the things that can happen. So you see, from our perspective, quantitative supply chain, there is no point in bringing people together to agree on the forecast, because the forecast is way too detailed. We are talking of literally tens of millions of numbers, hundreds of tens of thousands of product references, where you will have probabilities for every single day ahead for up to a year, with all the probabilities of having 0 unit of demand, 1, 2, 3 till infinity. So you have like a massive number of probabilities that you need to forecast. All of that has to be done automatically, which means that, I would say, unlike S&OP, if you bring people together, it is not to agree on the forecast. This is like a given delivered by the machine.
Okay, but the real sort of thing we talk about with the quantitative supply chain is we talk about those economic drivers, and we talk about having agreement on them. If you're in a company which has already got poor alignment in their S&OP processes, surely they're just going to have poor alignment and disagreement when it comes to those economic drivers.
Yes, and actually one of the key reasons why S&OP it's so difficult to implement is that various parties do not have the same incentives, and when it comes to forecasting, they might even have adversarial incentives, or incentive of not producing good forecasts at all. For example, people who have worked, I've talked to many people who have worked in large companies implementing S&OP, and everybody practice sandbagging. So what is sandbagging? Well, if you're part of the sales team, basically your forecast becomes your quota that you need to reach so that you can achieve your bonus, as a person, an employee working part of the sales team. So it is in your vivid interest to forecast something that is very low, so that you will easily exceed your target and exceed expectation and have your bonus and even maybe be promoted and whatnot. So as soon as you ask the key idea of asking, the sales team in S&OP, the sales forecast is supposed to be originating from the sales teams, was the idea that those people were the closest to the market, and so they should basically be responsible for producing the forecast. But the reality is that they have all incentive of doing it wrong, and so that goes completely counter to the goal. And obviously, if you have those incentives, they go against the idea that there will be, an alignment at the end of the day.
So as a way around that sort of sandbagging process, sales teams often kind of respond quite well to a little bonus. So if they're introduced a bonus for being more accurate with their forecasts, is that not a way of improving that?
Yes, but then you create another problem, which is then the easiest way to have a very, very accurate forecast is just to have very, very low expectations. Just because you say, okay, if I exceed my sales quota and so I'm in danger of losing my accuracy bonus, then I'm just not going to close the deal. You see, and I'm going to waste market opportunities by saying as soon as I hit my quota, I stop working. So again, having an incentive for forecasting accuracy is rewarding mediocrity in practice very frequently. So again, it's very difficult, plus the fact that most of the people that are very good at being salespeople, which means, having really understanding the client, understanding the dynamics of the market, of knowing exactly how to handle, I would say, subtle situation and whatnot, are not necessarily exactly skills that match with what you need to be extremely quantitative minded, relatively cold and good with numbers, etc., which might have a chance to turn into accurate statistical prediction. So again, it's also very difficult in practice, not only because the incentives are bad, but because your best salespeople are probably not the best statistician that you have in the company.
Okay, so if we agree it's probably difficult, S&OP is difficult. If we use sort of a real world example now, are there any companies out there that are actually succeeding with these processes and sort of leading the way?
I mean, again, yes. I mean, again, I would say the large FMCG companies, fast-moving consumer goods, have typically relatively good S&OP processes in place. They benefit from the fact that they have a relatively narrow range of products, so that really help for S&OP because the information must flow from human to human. So it works as long as the amount of information that needs to be moved around is not inhumanly large. So it works if you have like a very, if basically the number of product references that you have is like a few hundreds max, that can work. But it starts to fall apart as the complexity of your business increase, or that you want to deal with many geographic location and try to unlock benefits by like world scale coordination. In this case, you might have only 100 products, but if you want to coordinate what is happening over 80 countries, then you have like 8,000, products / country to be served, and suddenly it doesn't fit into the mind of a human anymore. And if you decide to have to organize your supply chain in silo with one unit per country, then you do not have worldwide coordination anymore, which means that you might have inefficiencies such as too much of one product in one country and too little of the same product in another.
So you talk about that mind of a human. I mean, we're now living in sort of a very much sort of a technological kind of age. Can we not just replace that mind of a human and use computers and still kind of successfully use these S&OP processes?
But that's a bit, what is the quantitative supply chain about? Quantitative supply chain is about the idea that you're going to use computers, processing, automated processing for what machines do best, which is raw calculation. So we are going to have completely automate the raw probabilistic forecast, and instead of bringing people together to agree on what is the state of the market, which is typically for most markets, better left to an automated process, which, by the way, doesn't fall from the sky. This automated process has been built by engineers who are both, software experts and statistical experts. So it's not like the machine on its own. No, it's just a way to say that you have engineered a process to deliver those statistical forecasts at scale. So yes, the S&OP 2.0, the way we could see quantitative supply chain is that if you bring people together, and there is a need to bring people together, it's to agree on the economic drivers. So what is bringing money to the company and what is costing money to the company, and there you need to have like a shared agreement across all division, such as, for example, what is the cost of money? If you invest money on if you allocate working capital to do something rather than something else, there is a cost for this capital. And
so what would be an example of that?
So the example would say, well, if I decide to transform dollars into extra inventory,
okay,
then obviously this is dollars that suddenly I cannot use anymore to buy extra trucks to expand my logistic capabilities. So the idea is that, and if I want, and basically this money, I get it maybe from the bank with an interest rate. And so there is a cost just by the fact that you allocate working capital for something. And the interest rates from the bank only partially reflect the cost of this working capital, because the bank might only lend X million dollars to your company at, let's say, 3% interest rate annual for lending you money. But if you reach your gross envelope, the bank is not lending you money anymore at all. So if you want more, you need to do some kind of fundraise or issue bonds or anything. So it becomes dramatically more complicated and more complex. So those are the sort of economic drivers. Same is, for example, the cost of stockout, of not serving a client. This is obviously something that is very difficult to assess, but collectively, people need to agree on what is the cost of stockout. Because, for example, the marketing division might even generate stockouts with some probability if they do operation that are, putting pressure that supply chain cannot handle. So that's they need to have like a shared agreement on when this happens, how much does it cost, so that they can. Each division can basically balance the reward benefits, the reward risk ratio for every action that they do.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of reasons to sort of move on from these sort of outdated S&OP kind of processes. So why is it that the market's still sort of implementing them in their companies? Why are they still using them?
So again, there is a lot of things that are, I would say, basic common sense in S&OP. So this part are not, to be discarded just like that. I mean, seeking high-level alignment is still good. Avoiding, I would say, turf war internally in your company is still good.
Very good.
So you have plenty of reasons that I would say common sense. And that's also something that S&OP emphasize, that the person that is supposed to be like holding the company together and basically making sure that there is a shared vision is the CEO, which also makes sense. And you see there is a lot of things that are like, I would say, high-level common sense and probably best practice for companies. So that part I would say is good. What the part where I believe that is most outdated is that when those people want to get together is exactly what kind of information is supposed to flow between people and what kind of agreement should they seek. S&OP, I would say, the historical version was to agree on the future state of the demand for the market. So that basically you will start with sales forecast, then you will establish your demand planning then your supply planning, then consolidate all your manufacturing plan, and iterate back on a monthly basis on this loop. And here you see the idea is that everybody gets back together to establish a shared vision on the demand. And what I'm saying is that this should be entirely automated. And so where you still need to have like alignment, but that the work in progress is on those economic drivers. And the very good news is that we switch from something that was where people were treated as consumable. You see, if you want to agree on what is the demand for the next 3 months, you need to do that now. In 1 month, you have to repeat demand for the next 3 months. So basically, whatever you do when you work in part of those meetings that takes place to support the S&OP process, the time of the people is consumed. You see, you repeat the same thing to do the same results and hopefully maintain the same quality. But fundamentally, this is not a capitalistic process. This is a process where the time of the people that are involved is consumed to support S&OP. Quantitative supply chain, again, we add a different twist. We said that when people meet is to improve the economic drivers that are then put into the daily data pipeline that just re-crunch all the data from beginning to end to generate all the decisions, especially purchasing decisions or manufacturing decisions or inventory movement decisions automatically, so that when people meet is to get a better recipe that is immediately turned into software logic that then run automatically, so that the time of the people, which is basically the resource that is the scarcest in the company, is used in a way that is highly capitalistic. So it capitalizes over time, the benefits accrue, which is not, I would say, by design, what you get with, I would say, the classical S&OP.
Okay, so to sort of conclude, if I'm a CEO and I'm looking to improve my processes internally, what would you recommend? Would you recommend sort of an S&OP process kind of combined with the quantitative supply chain? What sort of advice would you give?
Yes, I would say start with the basics is that when you use the time of your management, do you have your management that spend their time so that they can maintain the status quo or that they can improve upon the status quo? And I would say just start with this basic question is that when they do things, do they think just to maintain the system or to improve it? So that would be one thing. Then I would say rethink about what is the role of those computers, to flow information around. Do you expect that the information will flow from people to people or from machine to machine, especially when it comes to the thin-grained information about the exact status of your supply chain? So every single count of how many units, how many parts do you have at every single location worldwide, how many grams of raw materials do you have at every single location worldwide, etc., etc. So if you expect that this thin-grained information is supposed to flow from people to people, then you have a scalability issue. So rethink of what can be delegated to machines to a large extent, so that the people that you have can exercise, their skills and high-level intelligence at solving problems that actually require high-level intelligence, instead of having people that are used to basically do, I would say, semi-manual data crunching with Excel sheets. So that's probably the sort of things that would be status. And I think typically when you carry on this thinking, you end up with something that pretty much look like a descendant of S&OP that very much looks like something that would be similar to quantitative supply chain, although it's just names that I'm putting on stuff. But yes.
Okay, great. Well, hopefully today's discussion's gone a bit of a way to stop a few turf wars within a few companies. So that's everything for this week. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time. Bye for now.